Has someone ever tried to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself?
My parents skipped inviting me to the lake vacation, not because they misplaced my name or got confused by dates, but because my sister asked them not to, and I know that because I saw the photos first, then the comments. Then the family group chat where my name was never mentioned once, which told me everything I needed to know about where I sit in this family and how easily I can be removed when my sister wants a clean table with no one to contradict her. I am not new to being the backup plan. The one you call when you need a ride to the airport at dawn, or when the dog needs a sitter, or when a bill goes missing and the bank is suddenly the enemy. And I have been told for years that this is what family does: we help. We pitch in, we do not keep score, which sounds lovely until you notice that some people never open their wallet, never give up their plans, and never apologize for asking twice in the same week, and then try to make you feel dramatic for noticing the pattern. The way I found out was stupid in the most predictable way, because my cousin posted a highlight reel with those cheerful captions she loves, and there they all were standing in front of the rental sign like the cast of a show that forgot to include a main character. And there was my sister Jessica doing that grin she saves for moments when she gets what she wants with other people's effort, and my mom's comment underneath said something about how nice it felt to have the whole family together, which was a sentence that sat in my throat like a dare until I scrolled the comments and saw the part where someone asked, "Where is your other daughter?" And my mom said she had a lot going on this month and needed rest, which would have been almost kind if it were true. But really it was code for we did not invite her because Jessica said it would be easier without any tension. I put my phone down and walked around my apartment like I was looking for something I had dropped, and the thing I was hunting for was the line between being hurt and being done, because there is a difference. There is the ache you feel when people you love choose convenience over you, and then there is the switch that flips when you realize this is no accident and no misunderstanding and no oversight. This is a choice, and you are not a person they are afraid to hurt. I called my mom with that calm voice you use at work when a coworker misses a deadline and tries to make it your problem, and she did the usual soft shuffle where she says she thought I would be busy, and she did not want to pressure me, and she wanted to give me space. And I listened and said, "Sure, I appreciate that," and then I asked one simple question. Did Jessica say she did not want me there? And my mom paused just long enough to answer the question without words, then said something about the focus being on family harmony and how sometimes personalities clash, and how it might be better to keep things simple, which is the neat little speech you give when one person gets to decide the guest list and the other person is expected to applaud from home. I said okay and hung up, and then I did something I have not done in years. I wrote down the last 10 favors I had done for that side of the family, not because I needed to nurse a complaint list or turn love into accounting, but because I needed to look at a page and see if I was losing my mind, and what I saw was not pretty. It was rides and late-night calls and a loan I did not want to make, but did anyway after a round of guilt and promises. And I remembered the way my dad shook my hand and told me I was saving the day, and the way Jessica promised she would pay on time and keep things straightforward, and how my mom hugged me and said this was what sisters do, and all I could hear now was how quickly sisters become strangers when they get what they came for. There is a point when grief turns into clarity, and it is not a dramatic lightning strike. It is more like when you finally decide you are not going to explain the joke to someone who is pretending not to get it, and what clicked for me was simple. They wanted quiet. They wanted to curate a vacation where Jessica felt supported and centered and unchallenged, and I, who apparently bring tension simply by existing with a memory and a spine, had to be cut. So fine, if they wanted quiet, I would give them a version of quiet that actually meant something. You should know that I am not a screamer and I am not a big speech person. I do not show up at cabins to shout in parking lots or write long comments under photos for my aunt to screenshot, and honestly, I am too tired for that. So I started with something extremely small and extremely pointed. I opened the streaming accounts that everyone uses under my plan and I changed the passwords. Then I logged into the shared family phone plan where I have been paying the extra add-on for the tablet my parents like to use for games, and I removed the add-on with a kind of clean click that makes you feel like your time actually belongs to you. And when the messages started popping up in the family chat about the television not working and the tablet asking for a code, I put my phone face down and let the chat run itself, because you do not fix what people break on purpose. Then, because petty can be honest and also educational when applied correctly, I walked to my desk and pulled out the folder that holds the paperwork everyone pretended not to read when they were excited and stressed and eager for a solution. The folder with my name and Jessica's name and those lines about terms and rights and what happens when terms are violated, and I did not make a move yet. I just sat with it, because power can feel heavy when you are used to being the one who gets lectured about keeping the peace, and I wanted to choose the next step with a steady hand, not a shaky one. As the group chat wore itself out and the calls rolled to voicemail, I realized there was no way to unhear my mom calling the trip the whole family together, and there was no way to forget the pause before she admitted the obvious. And there was no reason to pretend this was anything but exactly what it looked like, so I ended the night with a very polite text to my parents that said I hoped they had a wonderful trip. I would not be available for a while due to a project I needed to focus on. And if they needed anything urgent, they could ask Jessica, because from now on the person who gets to make the decisions can also handle the needs that come with them, which sounds like a jab, and maybe it was, but it was also fair. I wish I could say I slept like a champion of boundaries, but the truth is I lay awake and thought about every time I had swallowed my pride to keep things smooth, and how smooth had turned into silent. And then I thought about the signature on those papers and the dates on those payments and the clause no one but me remembered, and right then, somewhere between angry and calm, I decided I was done being the extra chair they store in the garage until holidays. Which is why, the next morning, while they were packing coolers and trying to guess my new passwords, I opened my laptop, signed into the account that matters more than any streaming service, and hovered over the button that would change everything they had assumed I would never touch. The thing about being told for years that you are the reasonable one, the calm one, the one who will always take the high road because you hate chaos and like solutions, is that people begin to mistake your restraint for weakness. And they start to build plans on top of that mistake, which is exactly how my sister ended up believing that the money running through her business would keep pumping forever just because I had been the one who set it up and kept my tone friendly even when I was the only adult in the room asking basic questions like timelines, repayment, and what happens if things go sideways. When Jessica asked for help back then, she did not walk in with a pitch deck or projections or anything that looked like she had done homework. She walked in with our parents, with the story about families stepping up, with the suggestion that I could make a bridge loan for operating costs while she got her feet under her, and with a promise that she would keep it boring and predictable so that I would not have to think about it. And to her credit, we kept it relatively boring by putting it in writing, by using a straightforward promissory note I pulled from a boring template and then edited in plain language, by setting up automatic transfers so I would not have to send reminders, and by attaching a clause that said the revolving part of the loan could be ended at my discretion if payments were late, if communication went dark, or if conditions changed in a way that made me uncomfortable. Which at the time everyone nodded at because they were eager to get to yes and assumed the clause would sit there like a smoke alarm with dead batteries. I remember the first month she pushed a payment to the very last day and then texted a laugh about how new systems take time and how I should not turn into a banker on her. And I let it go because I could see the stress all over her voice and because I do not get a kick out of policing people I love. But the second month she tried the same dance, and I called to say this is not hard. The money leaves the account and we all keep our sanity. And she apologized in that bright way that makes you feel silly for bringing it up, and then months went by, and the transfers ran, and my parents started talking about her business like it was a baby that everyone should coo over and protect. And somewhere along the way they forgot that I was the one holding the bottle. So when I sat at my desk after the vacation reveal and looked at the folder again, I felt two overlapping things that do not usually live together. The first was a tired sadness at how small they must think I am to believe I would accept being erased from my own family's idea of together, and the second was a clean kind of focus that comes when the rules finally feel simple, and the rule I chose was this. If you remove me on purpose, you remove the benefits that come with me, and you do not get to curate my generosity. I logged into the account that manages the transfers and the revolving limit, and I stared at the dashboard longer than I needed to because I wanted to be sure I was not acting out of pure anger. I wanted to be sure I was honoring the part of me that has always tried to be fair even when other people are not, and once I felt that click of certainty, I went to the settings where the renewal toggles live. The ones Jessica has never seen because I set them when I created the loan, and I paused the revolving feature with a single decision that did not require a speech or a debate, which meant that no new draws would go through, no automatic top-ups would roll into her account, and no more quiet late-night fixes would cover gaps while she curated her image of being self-made. Then I opened a blank email and kept it painfully simple, because I've learned that complicated explanations invite arguments while straightforward facts end them, and I wrote to Jessica and copied my parents and her accountant, who had been included on the original paperwork precisely so there would never be any confusion, and I said the revolving feature of the loan facility is terminated effective immediately pursuant to the clause we all signed. The balance will continue under the original repayment schedule, there will be no new advances, and future changes will be communicated in writing only. And before I hit send, I attached the original note with the relevant paragraph highlighted, so no one would waste my time pretending that they did not know what they had agreed to when they were eager for my help. I pressed send and waited for the immediate sting to pass, because even when you are right and even when you are calm, there is a feeling that comes with drawing a line. A feeling that looks a little like guilt and a lot like the old training kicking in. And I let that feeling walk through me without staying. Then I took one more step that was small on paper and massive in practice. I logged into the payment processor that moves her customer receipts into that same business account and removed my standing authorization for emergency float transfers, a safety net I had created quietly in the early days to cover delays from vendors and weekend gaps, which meant the cushion she had treated as a given would now be gone. Not as punishment for punishment's sake, but as a realignment with reality, because adults who deliberately cut out family do not get to keep secret family parachutes. My phone started buzzing right away. First the accountant with a professional tone that had a little prank whistle tucked inside it as if he was trying to figure out if this was a glitch. Then my mom calling twice without a message. Then Jessica texting that she was out of town and could we talk later because she did not want to deal with business drama while she was trying to unwind, which was the kind of message that makes you laugh out loud in a way that does not feel kind but does feel honest. And I replied once, in writing, that the decision is final, the terms are in the attached document, and all further communication should be professional and in writing. And then I put the phone down again because I had already wasted enough of my life explaining simple boundaries to people who pretend not to understand them. Now, I know some people would say that was enough and that I should have left it there to let the message sink in, but I also know my family. I know how fast the story machine starts spinning. I know how quickly a calm boundary gets recast as a tantrum. So I took one last step that was not loud but would be heard. I logged into the bank and toggled off the overdraft protection that I had linked months ago as a personal guarantee, the quiet backstop that saved her from fees and frantic calls. And I disconnected it, which means the business account now has to live on what it earns and what it has, not on what I am willing to subsidize while being edited out of family photos. It was a clean series of clicks and a clean series of sentences, and while the vacation photos kept rolling in with their cheerful captions and their pretend togetherness, I sat in my kitchen and felt, for the first time in a long time, like I had stepped into the center of my own life again, and the best part was that no one could argue with what I had done without admitting what they had taken for granted. And if you are wondering whether I was finished, let me answer the way my old templates do, with a simple phrase that changes the temperature of a room. Not yet, because the clause they signed includes a right I have rarely used, and the calendar is about to make that right very relevant. When I tell you that the decision to cut off the revolving part of the loan was only the beginning, I mean it in the clearest sense, because as heavy as that click felt in the moment, there was still another weight sitting in that folder on my desk. And it was the part of the paperwork that everyone signed quickly without reading carefully, the clause that spelled out what would happen if payments were missed, if terms were ignored, or if the lender, that was me, chose to accelerate repayment in The event of material breach, and I cannot overstate how hard I stared at those words because for years I had been trained to downplay my own leverage, to act as if being reasonable meant pretending not to see what was written in black and white. Back when we drew up that loan, I insisted on clarity because I had already watched my parents bend reality whenever Jessica hit a wall. They would tell her it was just a bump, just a learning curve, just something that required a little extra help. And I knew if I gave them wiggle room they would crawl into it and live there, so I wrote the document with no wiggle room, and the clause they skimmed right past was an acceleration clause, meaning if she defaulted or failed to comply with the terms, I could demand full repayment at once, and because she had already been late and casual more than once, I had the legal right to exercise it. But what I was weighing now was not just what I could do but what I wanted to do, and that tension was loud in my head. The rational part of me whispered that cutting off the revolving facility was already enough of a message, that she would panic, my parents would scold, and eventually the family would rearrange itself in a way that at least acknowledged I was not a silent donor. But the part of me that had sat alone scrolling through those vacation pictures, the part that had heard my mother's careful pause when I asked if Jessica requested my exclusion, the part that had been gaslit for years into swallowing the idea that fairness was optional if it inconvenienced Jessica, that part wanted to remind them all that leverage only works when you are willing to use it. So I spent that entire night reading every line of the contract again, highlighting, underlining, checking dates, and the next morning I made myself a long black coffee and opened my email, drafting a notice of acceleration that was calm, short, and brutal in its simplicity, stating that pursuant to Clause 8 of the promissory note, the lender is exercising the right to demand immediate repayment of the remaining principal and interest due within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in referral to collections and enforcement, all rights reserved. I did not send it yet. I saved it as a draft because I wanted the satisfaction of knowing it was real without the finality of unleashing it until I had thought through the consequences. As I sat there with the draft glowing back at me, my phone buzzed again and again with calls I let go to voicemail, and the messages stacked up in the family chat, shifting in tone from confusion to irritation to what my mom always thinks is diplomacy. The kind of messages where she says things like, "We should talk this out," and "family shouldn't be about money," and "you know your sister is under a lot of stress right now," all of which translated neatly into "please back down again so that Jessica doesn't have to feel uncomfortable," and with every message I felt less guilty and more certain, because it confirmed that nothing I had done so far had actually shaken their belief that I would eventually cave. Jessica finally called me herself that evening, and I let it ring until the last second before I picked up, not to be cruel, but to remind her that she was not on my schedule anymore. And when I said hello, she jumped straight into it with her usual combination of indignation and charm, telling me that cutting off the revolving feature was extreme, that I should have come to her directly, that I was undermining her reputation with her vendors, and that I was acting, in her words, out of jealousy. For once, which made me laugh in a way I think startled her, because it was the kind of laugh you can only give when someone has officially run out of original material. I told her in the same calm voice I had used with my mom that this was not about jealousy, this was about respect, and that she and our parents had made it clear I was optional when it came to family. So I had decided to make myself optional in her financial safety net too, and that if she wanted to discuss jealousy, she might consider why she needed me quietly bankrolling her while she posted photos pretending to be independent. She sputtered, threatened to involve our parents, and finally hung up with a dramatic sigh, and the second the call ended I opened my email and hovered over that draft again. The part of me that wanted them to sweat said to hit send right then and there, to let the 30-day clock start ticking and to watch the panic unfold in real time, but another part of me, the strategist part, said wait, let the silence build. Let them realize you hold not just one card, but the entire deck, because the power is not only in pressing the button, but in making them live with the knowledge that you might press it any time. So I left the draft in my folder, knowing that Jessica's business would soon hit a cash wall without the revolving float and without overdraft protection, and knowing that when she scrambled to patch it, she would have to look over her shoulder at the possibility of that acceleration notice landing in her inbox at any moment. By the time the weekend ended, the calls had turned to pleading. My mom was asking me to meet in person to work this out, and my dad sent me a message about family unity that sounded like he had copied it from a church bulletin. But what struck me most was that not once in any of their words did I hear the one thing that might have made me pause, and that was an apology, because they were still talking in circles, still treating me like the problem to be managed rather than the person who had been excluded. And so I decided that the draft would not stay in my folder forever. It would either be sent or destroyed, and the choice would be theirs, not mine, depending entirely on how they decided to handle the reality of the mess they had created. That night I slept better than I had in weeks, not because anything was resolved, but because I had finally stopped pretending I did not hold the power to resolve it on my terms, and while they were panicking and plotting their next plea, I was counting down in my head, waiting to see if they would figure out that silence can be louder than any speech, and wondering how much longer they could hold their own breath before admitting the truth they had spent years avoiding. The moment the revolving loan stopped feeding her account, I knew there would be fallout, but I underestimated just how fast the panic would set in, because it took less than 3 days before my phone lit up like it had been plugged into a live socket. With my parents calling back to back, Jessica's number flashing every hour, and even the accountant trying to sound detached while hinting that it would be simpler for everyone if I restored the arrangement without delay, and what struck me as almost funny was how quickly the conversation skipped right past what had been done to me, as if my exclusion from the family vacation, the pause on my name in the group chat, and the silence that followed did not matter in the face of her sudden financial squeeze. The first real conversation I picked up was my dad, who has always tried to keep his voice calm even when his words are sharp, and he started with, "Look, I don't know what this is about, but you're putting us all in a very difficult spot," which told me instantly that he either didn't understand or didn't want to understand that I wasn't the one who had created the spot in the first place. I let him talk. I listened to his rehearsed sentences about family obligations and reputation, about how banks and suppliers were already sniffing around, and about how this was going to hurt Jessica's credibility, and when he finally stopped, I asked him very clearly why he thought my credibility wasn't worth protecting when they chose to leave me out of the family trip. The silence on the other end wasn't just awkward, it was empty, because he had no answer that would sound even remotely decent, so he fell back on his favorite tactic, which was to sigh and say, "That's different, don't mix things," as though the wound they had carved out of me was a separate ledger that didn't count in this balance sheet. My mom was no better, because when she called, she went straight for guilt, talking about how Jessica was under enormous stress with her business, how this wasn't the time to play hardball, how family was supposed to pull together, and how I was risking relationships that should matter more than money. I listened to every word, and then I said the only thing that mattered. If family is supposed to pull together, why did you let Jessica decide I shouldn't even be present? Why did you allow her to rewrite the meaning of togetherness in a way that erased me? And why is it only my job to keep swallowing that kind of treatment? She tried to soften it, said I was overreacting, said they just wanted a peaceful trip, and I could feel my jaw clenching as I reminded her that peace bought at the expense of one person's dignity is not peace, it's submission, and I was finished submitting. Jessica, of course, took another approach, because her calls weren't filled with guilt or calm tones, they were filled with indignation, like I had committed a betrayal by exercising the rights she herself had agreed to in writing. And she shouted about contracts being just technicalities, about me weaponizing fine print, and about how family doesn't use legalese against each other. I waited until she finished her rant, and then I told her as plainly as I could that family also doesn't exclude one of their own at the request of another. Family doesn't treat someone as disposable when it's convenient. And family doesn't lean on the quiet one's wallet while mocking her behind her back. I told her that if she wanted to paint me as the villain, she should remember who put the brush in my hand by trying to erase me in the first place. The silence after that was telling, because for once, Jessica didn't have a comeback. She hung up, and the next wave of calls wasn't even about negotiation. It was about panic, because apparently vendors had already flagged her account. A couple of transactions had bounced. And the accountant had warned her that without new capital she was staring down penalties that could snowball quickly. That was when my phone filled with messages from both parents trying to frame this as an emergency that concerned the whole family, and I couldn't help but laugh at the irony, because just a week earlier, the whole family had apparently not included me, but now, when money was bleeding out, suddenly I was central enough to warrant desperate appeals. I didn't rush to reply. I let hours pass. I let them feel the silence the way I had felt it scrolling through those lake vacation photos when the whole family was supposedly together. And when I finally did respond, it was with a single message: "You didn't need me when you planned your trip, so maybe you don't need me now. Work it out with Jessica. She makes the decisions, remember." I sent it and turned my phone off for the night because I knew that message would land like a hammer. By morning, there were voicemails full of anger, pleading, bargaining, and not once did I hear the one word that could have shifted my stance: sorry. Not one apology, not one acknowledgement that what they had done was cruel, not even a half-hearted attempt to admit that I deserved better. All I heard was the language of panic, of people who had assumed I would always bend, and who were now terrified because I had chosen not to. What I realized in those hours was that I didn't need to send the acceleration notice yet, because my silence was doing the job for me. They were scrambling, unraveling, second-guessing themselves, and every unanswered call was another reminder that I was no longer playing by their script. And in that space, for the first time in years, I felt control not as a burden, but as a balance finally tipping back toward me. Still, the thought of the draft sat in the back of my mind like a loaded chamber, ready to fire if I wanted, and I knew I wasn't done, not yet, because they had shown me who they were. And now it was my turn to show them who I could be when they mistook my silence for weakness. And as their panic grew louder, my decision became quieter and sharper. I wouldn't just let them spin. I would decide exactly when and how to end the spinning, because the final move was still mine to make. I woke up the next morning with that email draft still sitting in my outbox like a loaded decision waiting for a finger, and I realized that if I sent it out of spite, I would regret the tone even if I did not regret the content, which is why I made a coffee. Took a long breath that did not fix anything but made space for a better choice, and texted a simple invitation to my parents and to Jessica for a quick meeting on video later that afternoon, because if they were going to hear me, they were going to hear me clearly, without me raising my voice or repeating myself, and without them pretending they did not understand what words mean when they are not convenient. They joined a few minutes late with that strange small talk people use when the house is already on fire, and my mom started to say she hated that we were fighting, and my dad tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, while Jessica sat back with that brittle confidence that always shows up right before she asks for another concession, and I let them get through their rehearsed openings. Then I said the only thing that mattered, which was that this conversation had two possible outcomes in there. Would be no third option, because either we acknowledge what happened and fix it like adults, or we accept that there is nothing to fix and we transition this debt from a family arrangement to a professional problem that does not involve my phone number, my patience, or my weekends. I laid it out in the same plain voice I would use with a stranger at a bank, telling them that I would keep the acceleration notice unsent and the repayment plan as is under one condition that was not negotiable, which was a real apology that did not try to soften what they did to me, followed by a written boundary that said no more asks from me for the business, no more add-ons on my accounts, no more anonymous favors presented as family duty, and no more decisions about gatherings where I am discussed as a problem rather than invited as a person, and I said I did not need speeches or gifts or a public performance. I needed a single clean acknowledgement that what they did was wrong and would not be repeated. And after that we would all go back to our corners and live our lives with fewer expectations and a lot more honesty. You would think that would be the moment where a normal family blinks, where someone says the word that has been missing, where a mother or a sister or a father finds the courage to step over pride and say, "We are sorry, we were cruel, we did not treat you like family." But what happened instead was the same dance I have watched since we were kids, my mom trying to wrap the word peace around the word convenient, my dad lecturing about how money complicates love, and Jessica, who could have ended The entire thing in one sentence, deciding to defend the lake trip as a necessary reset and to accuse me of using a loan to control her life. And in that moment, I felt something inside me go quiet in a way that did not feel angry or dramatic. It felt finished. I said thank you for making it easy, and while they were all still talking, I pulled up the email draft that had been waiting like a sealed letter on the edge of my desk, and I read it one more time to make sure it was not cruel for cruelty's sake. Made a small change to remove a sentence that sounded like a speech, and I hit send, and the click was so light and so final that I almost laughed, because sometimes the loudest thing you can do is take an action that does not need an audience, and as their faces kept moving on the screen, asking me to calm down and to be reasonable and to think about family. The notices were already landing in their inboxes with the clear language none of us could spin, stating that under the clause we all signed the full amount was now due within 30 days, that failure to comply would trigger enforcement, and that all communication should go through email only. My mom said my name like a plea. My dad asked me to reconsider. Jessica tried to act like this was illegal and would never hold. And I told them calmly that the only thing that never holds is the version of the story where I keep saying yes while they keep deleting me from photos and plans, and then I ended the call because there was nothing left to discuss. And I called the accountant directly to confirm receipt and to request a payoff statement, because if this was going to get handled, it was going to get handled cleanly. And I forwarded the file to a professional servicing company that I had already vetted in case I needed a wall between me and their panic. And I signed the agreement that transferred day-to-day enforcement to people who do not take things personally, because I was finished being the beating heart attached to their budget. The next 48 hours were a flood of messages that ran the full spectrum from bargaining to dramatics to fake legal threats copied from search results, followed by new tones I had not heard from them before. Tones that sounded like respect in the shape of caution. Because once the accountant responded with dates and sums and the servicing company sent their standardized letters, the story shifted from a family squabble to an obligation with a countdown, and even though I did not enjoy 1 second of watching them spin, I would be lying if I said it was not satisfying to see the same people who had called the lake trip the whole family now using the phrase "we need your cooperation," which was a phrase I had been speaking into a void for years. Here is the part that some people will not like and that others will hold on to like a rope. I did not forgive them on the spot when the apologies finally started showing up in fragments. I did not reopen the revolving feature. I did not reinstate the overdraft link. And I did not pull the acceleration notice back, because my forgiveness has never been the problem, their respect has, and my boundary was not a bargaining chip, it was a change in how I live. So I thanked them for their messages, told them I heard them, and reminded them that the payment clock was running and that anything beyond that would have to be earned over time, the same way they expect invoices to be paid on time when it is their turn to be owed. In the final week of the 30-day window, Jessica sent one last long email that tried to be everything at once: apology and defense and manipulation and nostalgia. And buried in the middle of it was the sentence I had been waiting to hear since the day they left me off the guest list. A clean admission that she had asked our parents not to invite me because she wanted a trip that felt easy. And that she had not considered that easy for her meant erasing me, and that she understood now that I was not the problem to be managed. I was the person she had treated like a tool, and I sat there and read that sentence 3 times. Then I replied with 3 lines that said I accept the apology, the payment terms stand, and I am not your tool. They paid the balance on the last possible day with money that did not come from me. The servicing company closed the file. I archived the emails and the screenshots and the countersigned release. And I did one more quiet thing for myself that felt like a door finally closing without slamming. I removed myself from the family plan entirely and set up new accounts with my own name and no extra seats. And I muted the group chat because I am not a spectator in my own life anymore, and if they want to invite me next year, they will have to say the words out loud and mean them, and they will learn the same lesson I had to learn the hard way, which is that peace built on pretending is not peace. It is a bill that comes due, and this time it was paid. People keep asking if it felt like too much, and I tell them the only honest answer, which is that it felt like the exact right amount, because I did not ruin her, I did not humiliate them in public, I did not scorch the earth. I simply returned what they handed me, a choice, and I chose myself, and now when I see those photos labeled whole family, I do not flinch, I do not explain, I do not beg. I just smile at the thought that they finally know the one thing they had worked so hard to forget, which is that I was never optional. I was the person keeping the lights on, and I am the one who turned them off when they decided I did not belong in the room. And if that sounds like a lot, good, because it was, and it was earned, and it was mine.